Traveling Salesman Music by Daniel King, a project for statistical physics at St. Olaf College. An octave on a piano consists of 12 scale degrees. We can label these scale degrees 1 through 12 as such. The key of a piece of music is in a rough sense decided by which note we choose to call 1, or the tonic. In this case, we find ourselves in the familiar key of C. If you've ever seen The Sound of Music, you're probably familiar with the following sequence. This collection of notes is referred to as the major scale and is ubiquitous in popular music. However, if you want to get minor, all you need to do is shift one or more of the degrees of mi, la, or ti down 1/2 step. So mi becomes me, la becomes le, and ti becomes te. This gives the scale a just off quality, which you can hear in the following sequence. This scale is known as the natural minor. There are 2 scale degrees we have yet to talk about, and these are 2 and 7. These are very rarely used in popular music because they sound especially off. A hand-wavy reason for why this is because do and so are considered especially stable, so shifting them up or down 1/2 step creates degrees that are especially unstable. Putting everything we know together creates the chromatic scale, which sounds like this. Alright, here's a question. Given a sequence of melodic events like the chromatic scale shown above, what's the best way to arrange the notes? This happens to correspond to a school of music called 12-tone composition, which bases its music upon including every note in the chromatic scale exactly once. But we can do better. What about any melodic sequence? For example, what's the best way to hit every note in Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star? It's a traveling salesman problem. The algorithm is as follows. First, we statistically analyze free MIDI files online to construct probability matrices of first-order transitions in tone and rhythm. For example, T-tonal 1-8 is the probability of scale degree 1, or do, to be followed by scale degree 8, or so. Likewise, T-rhythm 2-4 is the probability of an 8th note, which is 2 16th notes, to be followed by a quarter note, which is 4 16th notes. Step 2. We can now assign a plausibility to a sequence of melodic events as follows. A set of melodic events consists of n rhythmic and n tonal events. We can calculate a tonal plausibility by multiplying over the probability of all tonal transitions, and likewise we calculate a rhythmic plausibility by multiplying over the probability of all rhythmic transitions. The total plausibility of the sequence can then be determined by taking the product of these 2 plausibilities. Step 3. Now that we know how to assign a plausibility to any given sequence of melodic events, the algorithm proceeds as follows. First, it calculates the plausibility for some melodic sequence M. Then it swaps to events and calculates the plausibility of the new sequence M star. It decides what to do next with the following logic. If the plausibility of M star is greater than the plausibility of M, then move ahead with M star. Otherwise, if the plausibility of M star is less than the plausibility of M, it weighs the plausibilities against one another and generates a random number. It proceeds with M star with the probability shown. Otherwise, it switches back to M. The algorithm continues in this fashion, swapping between melodic events, and it saves the most plausible sequence it encounters, which is then written into music. Now all that's left is to generate the transition matrices. Here are the melodies I analyzed to generate the transition matrices. I tried to stick to pop songs to keep in genre, and I favored melodies I knew so I could easily tell if the MIDI was accurate or not. And trust me, there are some pretty bad MIDI files to be found online. Here are the frequencies with which each scale degree was encountered. As you can see, the most common by far are do and so, because these are the most stable, while the least common by far are D and Fi, because they're the least stable. Breaking it down into major and minor modes as expected, we can see that minor modes have a strong preference for me, le, and te, while major modes, on the other hand, have a strong preference for mi, la, and ti. Here's the complete matrix I used in my algorithm, with 1 through 12 representing the 12 scale degrees do through ti, and 13 representing rests. Unsurprisingly, rests are likely to follow almost any scale degree, but particularly do, which makes sense. Melodic phrases often end on do as a form of resolution. Speaking about resolutions, we can see the strong tendency of scale degrees to resolve to either do or so. For example, do likes to be followed by itself, and re has a very strong tendency to resolve to do. Likewise, on the right side of the matrix, scale degrees lay through t have a choice, either resolve up to do or down to so. In general, they're most likely to resolve to whatever's closest. However, the most interesting feature of this matrix we have yet to talk about is the diagonal feature in the middle, and it shows a pattern. So goes down to fa, fi goes down to mi, fa goes down to me, and mi goes down to re. The pattern here is none other than downward stepwise motion. Remember this for later because it will play a big role in the outputs of our algorithm. In fact, and this is a bit speculative, I believe this tendency for downward stepwise motion can be seen in the scale frequencies themselves. For example, fa is more popular in minor keys because it is a whole step above me, whereas re is more popular in major keys because it is a whole step below mi. Moving on, here's the rhythmic transition matrix, with each number representing the number of 16th notes in the melodic vent. As expected, rhythmic transitions get less and less likely as the length of the note increases, simply due to the fact that these note lengths are less common in pop music. It's also nice to observe that quarter notes are likely to be followed by another quarter note, which makes sense. The most interesting feature here, however, is the zigzag. Where in the world does that come from? Here's one possible explanation. The zigzag comes from a willingness to complete a beat. For example, events with an odd number of 16th notes have a straggling 16th note at the end, so they need another 16th note to come back onto the beat. However, even numbers of 16th notes are left with a straggling 8th note at the end, so in these cases you need an 8th note to come back onto the beat. Thus, odd numbers of 16th notes usually need a 16th note to come back into the beat, and even numbers of 16th notes usually need an 8th note to come back onto the beat. And this is exactly what we see in the matrix. Odd number events are most likely to be followed by a 16th note, while even number events, except for quarter notes, are most likely to be followed by an 8th note. Alright, here's Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. The original had a plausibility of order 10 to the negative 22nd. Alright, for reference, here's a random mix of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, which had a plausibility of order 10 to the negative 26th. And finally, here's the algorithm solution, which had a plausibility of order 10 to the negative 19th, and was hit on 59 times. As you can see, this is pretty much what we might expect from looking at our transition matrices. It has two sequences of downward stepwise motion, and it puts the half notes at the ends to minimize their interactions because they're less probable. Alright, now for the algorithm's take on some 12-tone composition. Here's the original, which is just the chromatic scale with a very low plausibility of 10 to the negative 49th. And here's the algorithm solution, which has a much higher plausibility of 10 to the negative 33rd, and which was hit on over 9,000 times. As you can see, downward stepwise motion prevails. Not too bad, either. Special thanks to Dr. Craig Sapp at Stanford University, whose C++ library for parsing MIDI files greatly assisted in this project, to Dr. Diakonis, also at Stanford, for algorithm inspiration, and to Dr. Amy Colin at St. Olaf College for letting me do this and for being great prof. If you're still interested, I've linked in the description to the algorithm's take on some longer pieces, including Bach and Mozart.